Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we're doing our second ever weekly meta breakdown for the Timeless best of one format. If you're looking for best of three, the other formats, check out the playlist. We try to cover them every week. What we do here is look at the highest win rate decks from the MTG Arena ladder. We're going to focus predominantly on Diamond to Mythic rank today, and we get the data from Untapped GG, what you see on the screen. It's a companion tool that users can run alongside their Arena experience, tracks their win rates, aggregates those win rates with other users, gives us a whole bunch of cool stats so we can see what's happening on the ladder itself. Some people are asking about Explorer for the metagame challenge. I'll do that ahead. Usually I like to do it like the week of to give you an idea closer up to the events. I'll do the best of one play-in and I'll do the best of three as well, so you'll be ahead of that. But we are going to get started. If you want to use Untapped itself, link is in the video description. You can let them know I sent you. And then I will post all these deck lists. I will timestamp it. All the information's here. As always, let me know in the comments if you're finding differences in terms of what you're experiencing. If you have decks that are doing well, I'm trying to showcase each of these decks to have a gameplay video. So if you actually look at the Timeless playlist, at this point there should be gameplay for pretty much all of these, with the exception of I don't have Natural Order and I don't have Necropotence for Mythic wildcards, and I'm just running wildcards at this point, and I don't want to put money in. But everything else, we did that. We're starting to brew as well, trying to figure out like new decks, new ideas and stuff that can work in the format. So if you want to see gameplay for these, instructional, we try them all out as well. So we're going to start off with the popularity of decks, and then we'll look at the win rates. As I always mention, a popular deck doesn't necessarily correlate to the highest win rate decks. In some cases it does. In other cases, it could just be availability of cards. Some decks are just really expensive in this format to build, and they require a lot of like Mythic wild cards or whatever it may be. Some are just play style, some are just iconic cards, like people want to play with Ragavan or Oko or whatever it may be, Field of the Dead, and it doesn't necessarily always kind of correlate from that. But we're going to look, and Rakdos Burn is the top deck of the week, 16%. We have Grixis Shadow. So the thing is with Grixis Shadow right now, it's actually amalgamating their metadata tags in terms of what's classifying as Grixis Shadow is a little bit off right now. I'm going to shoot him a message to try to clean it up. But right now, from what I can see, there's a Dimir Dredge deck that is being tagged as Grixis Shadow, and there's also Grixis Tainted pact that's also being tagged as Grixis Shadow. Oddly enough, there wasn't a deck list for the actual Grixis Shadow that was showing up in the data dump for Diamond to Mythic. So it's misclassifying decks, which is skewing the overall population. So that's one thing I'm going to mention to them. We have Rakdos Midrange, then Mono Black Control, both at about 10%. Jund Midrange just shortly thereafter at 9.1. With Jund Midrange, there's kind of like Lurrus builds and non-Lurrus builds that go up to like Clothis and Minskimbu, as well as Jarsel. 5-color domain is the aggro version. It's domain zoo, so creatures as opposed to the 5-color domain you're used to in standard perhaps, with Atraxa kind of big ramp package. Izzet Tempo is in here, and then followed by Mono Red Burn. If you're looking for a budget deck, we'll cover it, but Mono Red Burn is actually pretty cheap to get into the format. It has the ability to kind of port into Rakdos Burn, which then builds you up the mana base to move into something like Rakdos Midrange, so it's a good kind of bridge deck if you're looking to get into the format. In terms of just like the popularity trends, as we look, we're starting to get like more than a week's worth of data, and just so this is popularity of the day. We're going to look at about 2 weeks kind of since inception to the December 27th of data for the set. The Rakdos, if we look at the Rakdos Burn, when it first came out the format, it was just like 4%. It's quadrupled basically in popularity. We've seen kind of static with Grixis Shadow, but again, the data is kind of skewed here. We're seeing Mono Black Control kind of level off. It kind of peaked at about 12 and it's kind of normalizing. A little bit of an increase in Rakdos Midrange. Similarly, Jund Midrange is increasing along with 4-color domain. And we're seeing decreases in the Mono Red Burn and Izzet Tempo decks. So if we're looking at the kind of breakdown, like I said, we're doing December 12th to the 27th. By doing this, I'm able to go to 50 matches. Some people have mentioned like the population size being smaller right now. I'm doing this on purpose. Obviously, like if we could do 500 games, that's a more normalized data set that gives us a more kind of static look in terms of what's performing and kind of weed out some noise and abnormalities in terms of like variance. However, at this point, the format's still fairly new. I also like capturing these kind of variances because you're able to see, like in some instances, Like say Dimir Dredge, you have these kind of two variations. They're very similar in terms of win rate, 67, 67.3, so 0.4%. The populations are fairly similar, but we can kind of start seeing the nuance. It's what's working, what's not, kind of some changes. And then it allows you as well to get a feel. Like for example, in this case here, I'm actually going to showcase this version of Dimir Dredge. I think it's a little bit better constructed. Just with access to like bone shards for removal. I really like Wonder in this deck. With the fetches, it allows you to get a better chance of hitting your islands, for example, to enable that. So we'll take a look in more detail there. But at this point, it gives us a little bit better selection. And even with like formats like Standard, I do it when the deck lists are fairly static in terms of archetypes. It's better to kind of see week over week what kind of nuance changes could be occurring, or what's working in a smaller sample size that's maybe breaking away from the established 60 card best cards. So highest win rate deck, Rakdos Midrange. So not the Burn, Midrange, 68.3%. So we got Lurrus Companion here. One thing I'll mention with some of the cards, if they're from Ixalan or Lord of the Rings, some of the like names on it when I paste the deck list sometimes get mixed up. I'll try to always correct it, but if there's ever a card missing, just ping me like in the comments and I'll fix them up. I try to catch it all, but sometimes like Lorien Revealed always gets messed up because of the accent. So 68%, 82 matches, and this is going to leverage like your Regavans, your Dragon Rage Chandler. Interestingly, they're opting for the full Inquisition No Thoughtseize package. Sometimes you'll see a split, so this helps you a little bit more on the life gain element of it. We're seeing 2 mountains, 2 swamps that allow you to play around Blood Moon as needed. If you're seeing a lot of basic mountains, you may want to proactively start fetching for your swamps to kind of hedge around that. But Deathrite Shaman, very useful in this deck. You'll sometimes see, and I do think it's reasonable to also approach it with having a singular copy of either an Overgrown Tomb or a Stomping Ground. Having access to all of Deathrite's activated abilities is very useful. Being able to exile something, say, like from a Dredge deck or an Uro, or just kind of messing up Delirium, gaining new life can be very useful, and I think the opportunity cost is fairly low in doing so. So I would make that one change and just put in whichever you feel kind of correlates better. I'd probably do black. It's pretty even. You can pick either or at this point, I think. But Hand Hate, a lot of removal between Fatal Push and Lightning Bolt. I like in this format at least 8 to 10 1-mana removal spells to just answer opponents' 1-drops, since a lot of them are snowbally and must be answered. Bauble works really nice with Dragon Rage, kind of refills your hand. A single Demonic Tutor for some kind of niche cards that you need. It's just extra copies, helps you find a card as needed. We have Orcish Bowmasters in here as one of the best cards in the format. A couple copies of Caraxa, as well as Go Blank. So with Go Blank, just exiles the graveyard, has a lot of utility mixed into there. There's going to be, I posted in the best of 3 version, there's a Rakdos Breach combo. Lura Shell, very kind of similar, but it's more combo and it wins through like recasting Dark Ritual multiple times with Tendrils of Agony as the win con. So that was in the best 3 video I posted. If you're liking that kind of version, that's something to check out. That's something I'm going to be doing a video in the next coming days. I admittedly had to watch some content just to see how the lines to play, because it's not like super straightforward. Once you kind of get the combo off, once you see it a couple times, it's a little bit easier to kind of go through the motions. Rakdos Burn, second highest win rate, 68%. So this deck here is, you know what? I'll give it to them. They went up to 20 lands, and this version's kind of paying off. I found the lower land count versions at 16 a little problematic, just from personal experience. I didn't love them. I was missing line drops a lot. I know some people said 16 is enough, but I found it a little iffy, kind of mixed in. But you're using things like Eidolon as well as Roiling Vortex. Opponents are naturally dealing a lot of damage to themselves with Fetch Shocks, potentially Thoughtseizes. So this kind of breaks that damage. You could also shut off life gain from things like Shieldred or Uro. You have a lot of cheap kind of burn with Lightning Bolts and Skewer the Critics that get that bonus. You have both Kumano and Akiba, which can enable Spectacle. Some folks were asking with Okiba, like, why play this? The big thing is Chapter 2 goes, so you can play this on 1, Chapter 2 goes off and it pings for Spectacle. There are versions that are running Light Up the Stage. which is another spectacle enabler. So this would be kind of a free enabler for both. This version is a little bit heavier on 1-drop, so lacking a little bit of card advantage, but kind of more initial pump in terms of damage. Bump in the Night is a cheap burn spell as well, and then Reg Events for card advantage. Sunbaked Canyon can be used as card draw, and then your Boatmaster's in there as well to punish card draw. Then go to Dimir Jund Midrange, 67%. So they're all kind of lumped in. We had like 68.3, 68, and then 67.7. So all 0.6 of themselves. So really it's a coin flip for like a game, probably win or loss, that kind of separating them at this point. So we have some overlap in terms of the Rakdos deck, but the big difference in this is the package, and again, Lurrus deck, questing druids, as well as Tarmogoyfs in this version here. So questing druid provides you card advantage in the deck, which is very nice. As well as a kind of growing threat in that regard. You have Tarmogoyf decks are naturally kind of filling their graveyards with lands, everything like that, artifacts. So this can be a fairly sizable creature. Now it does lack any sort of evasion. It does get hit by Fatal Push, but it is usually able to outscale things like Lightning Bolt, which provides some utility and oftentimes can be the biggest creature in the battlefield. So you can't play your Goyfs that much in Modern anymore or Legacy, but Goyf is slowly finding some home in this Timeless format. I still remember these were like $250 a pop, and now they're like $10 in paper. This was like, I will say, Arena was the first time I ever cast Goyf. I just could never justify dropping like $800 to $1,000 for a playset. So we have Dimir Dredge, which I mentioned in the earlier step, 67.3. And this deck is largely just what's available in Historic with the addition of fetch lines. So the fetch lines help enable more Bloodghast kind of to come back multiple times. This version's on the Bone Shards that you can either sack a creature or discard a card. This helps put into your graveyard prized amalgams and Silver Smoke Ghouls that you may draw. Merfolk Secret Keeper, Otherworldly Gaze, Stitcher Supplier, Glimpse the Unthinkable, Founding of the Third Path, all ways to kind of self-mill. When creatures come back, triggers Prize Amalgam, Creeping Chill will get you back Silver Smote, and then Wonder is a nice way with the islands to give all your creatures flying. So I think this deck's doing well in part because it's not really that weak to single targeted removal, and oftentimes you can also outpace a Deathrite Shaman because there's not necessarily one key creature in your yard. You're often putting multiple or getting them back, so the timing, and they have to kind of keep it up in terms of mana. And then if they're just killing stuff, oftentimes it just comes back. So unless they have things like Farewell or Divine Purge, which we're not seeing much in the format, it kind of beats it in that respect. We have Mono Red Burn. So like I was mentioning, this is a relatively cheap deck compared to some of the other decks in the format. Right now, you're using 4, 8 rares, 10 rares, like 10, 18, 19 rares, 4 mythics. Not huge amount. You could obviously offset some of this in terms of the mana base. The fetches help a bit, but you can get away if you're slowly building up to it. I think this is beneficial as a way to kind of get started in the format. Like I said, like crafting these fetches are a good investment. Den of the Bugbear, while not heavily played in this format, in other formats, is very representative. If you're playing Rakdos Mid, if you're playing any of the red decks, there's usually 1 to 2 copies of Den in there. This version here, you have your Lightning Bolts, Play with Fires, Static Discharges, all ways to deal with burn, Skewer in here, Light Up the Stage. All these cards will see play in some shell or common uncommons, so they are ways to kind of play in that regard. If you do want and you have the mana to do so, or you can make this a Lurrus shell if you want, just kind of include within your fetch lines, just revise it to have access to either white lands like Stomping or Sacred Foundry or Blood Crypt, and then you can cast Lurrus in this deck as well. Then go to Sultai Midrange. This is very similar to the deck I posted initially in one of my videos. So this is a Brainstormless version, playing a little bit more to the board. And when I built this version, originally I had 4 mana Vraska in here, Golgari Queen. Instead I was playing like Tyvar, just to kind of rebuy your creatures. This version, a little bit fewer in terms of 1-drops, ultimately, than what I was looking for after playing it a little bit more. The full 4 Uros might be too much as well. You probably want to play, after playing some games with this deck, Treasure Cruise or Dig Through Time in addition, just as some sustained card advantage. You likely will play Brainstorm as well, but Halfling and Deathrite Shaman let you accelerate into Oko Tyvar. Bowmaster's in here, Drown in the Loch, Bitter Triumph is kind of a scalable removal spell. Lapse, but ultimately the big thing if you want to play, like, it's putting up reasonable stats at 65%, all things considered, but I would probably find space for another cheap removal spell in the colors. 1 to 2 mana spell. I just think that you do need to answer the creatures earlier in the format. There's a lot of powerful 1-drops that you do need to answer as they kind of come up. We then go to mono black control. So this one's a little bit of an interesting one. It does have higher win rate than the traditional kind of full Dark Ritual, full 4 necropotence, full kind of 1-ring package. A little bit more interaction. So no Liliana's in this one. Liliana the Veil is an interesting card because at times it can be very devastating, especially on turn 1. But oftentimes you need to supplement that by offsetting cards with necropotence. In a format with so many Bowmasters, it's not a clean edict effect at times because Bowmaster kind of eats up, the token eats up the edict and the Bowmaster ping takes out the Liliana. So they're still kind of net positive, all things. This version here, Dark Ritual, you can go into an early necropotence, Phyrexian Arena, but you can also cheat out an early Phyrexian Obliterator where outside of Fatal Push, like all the red-based damage makes it a little bit difficult against Zoo. Like they only have Okos if they're playing it or Leyline Bindings. So it's an interesting kind of inclusion in this regard. Some Languishes as sweepers, Shieldred 1-ring, very powerful. Murderous Rider, Heartless Act. You got Fatal Pushes in here. 5 pieces of Hand Hate. So just kind of killing everything. Cabal Stronghold, Castle Lockwing, Hive of the Eye Tyrant. 2 Bajuka Bogs can be timely. Cards that are missing from here that would be reasonable, and I've seen in some instances, a couple copies of Fetch Lands, you play Deathrite Shaman, you play Overgrown Tomb, also helps in these types of archetypes, but Languish deals with most of the creatures in the format, while leaving your Obliterator and Shieldred behind, so can allow you to play a little bit of catch-up, but this deck's usually just drawing a bunch of cards. Turn 1 Necropotence is quite hard, especially when your opponent's on the play, to catch up with, just in terms of their crude card advantage. We then go to Izzet Tempo, Izzet Phoenix. This one's at 63.5. I will say right off the bat, this deck's pretty tight in terms of the deck list. The only thing I would say is these Monastery Swishers should be Ledger Shredders, so I would just swap that. This version had a higher win rate than the other Phoenix deck, but again, smaller sample sizes. I don't think you really want Swiftspear in this type of shell necessarily. Where Ledger Shredder helps you kind of bin cards, loots, and kind of fuels the process a little bit better. You can also go Brainstorm, which is missing from this list. That's another card that could be included and very useful in these shells, but Dragon Rage Chandler helps enable the graveyard. You have 8 pieces of burn between Lightning Bolt and Unholy Heat, along with 2 Lightning Axes that also can help you bin the Phoenix. Consider Sleight of Hand to help put cards into your graveyard along with the looting. DRC, same idea. If this was Ledger Shredder, kind of go in here. Bauble helps both cycles, enables Delirium, it fuels kind of the Surveil, and then it also is kind of free fodder for Treasure Cruises to get you back your Phoenix as early as turn 3 in the deck. Kind of mixed into there. What I do like with this, and I've seen, these decks play 18 lands. You often see Hall of Storm Giants. I don't really know how reliably you are going to be getting to 8 mana or 7 mana for Hull, where Den seems a lot more reasonable in terms of ability to cast. You then go to 5-color Zoo, 63.2%. So there's a few different versions of this deck. We have the Oko version. I've seen some with Minskin Boo in there. Core of the deck, you're using Fetch Lands to enable Domain through Shock Lands, a couple of Triomes off color. This makes Tribal Flames deal upwards of 5 damage to any target, along with Lightning Bolt. So lots of burn in the deck. Regvan early, Wild Nacatl is a 1 mana, 3/3 most of the time. Nishiba Brawlers, a 2 mana, 5/3 Trampler. Kavu's a 2 mana, 5/5. A couple copies of Bowmaster. This version is going upwards of 3 once upon a times. I personally think that's too many. I would play like 1 and then either play like a Minskimbu or just go up the full set of Bowmasters. Personally, I'm of the opinion once is great in your opening hand, but afterwards it's just kind of a shitty card draw spell for 2 mana, where I'd rather be more threat dense in this type of deck. The card that I've not been completely sold on is Stubborn Denial. Now, this deck probably enables it the best. I think it's a trap in the Grixis Shadow deck because it only really works with the Shadow when it's already, you're kind of ahead when it's big enough. At least with this deck, you have Nashiba Brawler and Territorial Kavu, which can also often enable it. I was slowly trimming down the copies personally in it. I think Spell Pierce is a little bit more consistent just in terms of hitting what you want, because oftentimes this was just a bad kind of force spike I was finding. I know it's working for other people. It could just be kind of my experience with it, but I've not loved this card, all things considered. But the one thing I would say, a lot of these decks are skimping on a Stomping Ground. I found in terms of fetching, oftentimes I did want access to the Stomping Ground, so I did cut the basic Mountain in lieu. I think you're already kind of weak to you're already weak to Blood Moon effects. You're already weak to Field of Ruin style effects, so I would just play like the 1 force, kind of go from there. There's also versions of the deck that are a little bit heavier on black that are playing Deathrite Shaman as another cheap enabler to the deck. So again, when you're playing 5 colors, there's a lot of different ways to approach the decks. It's kind of how you want to attack the meta itself. So next up is Mono Red Blood Moon. This is my deck. This is the deck I've most enjoyed playing in the format. I haven't played it much myself, but I think I'm 7-3. I've been trying out a bunch of different things. Yeah, I'm 7-3 with the list. I guess tracked. I was playing on my iPad a lot, so it didn't get tracked. Still putting up reasonable stats. What I like about this deck is you have 10 1-mana removal spells between Unholy Heat, Spikefield Hazard, and Lightning Bolt. You have the Bauble, Dragon Rage Chandler, Regavan, that helps you kind of dig. You also have Bone Crusher Giant as a 2-mana removal spell. So you can play a Bosch if you get rid of Bauble. I find a Bauble much more useful for the deck as opposed to a Bosch. A Bosch also telegraphs that you are likely a Blood Moon deck and that it kind of insinuates what you may or may not have in the deck based on the converted mana cost. The big thing here is, and especially in Best of One, is you could sneak wins by your opponent not knowing what you have. So they often fetch early for non-basics, and then Blood Moon could kind of punish them that way there. Bauble is also really good because in addition to enabling Delirium, or just free kind of spells for this, it's an artifact for Unholy Heat, which helps to scale this up much quicker. It also kind of thins out your deck by just drawing new cards. The Blood Moons can lock out your opponent. What I do like about this deck as well is between Fable the Mirrorbreaker, Seasoned Pyromancer, and Ox of Agonis, you can pretty much loot these away when you don't need them if it's in a matchup that Blood Moon's just not topical at the time. Fable's really good. Just most of the time I'm winning through like a flipped Fable. This requires 2 answers oftentimes. Fable copying Pyro or Ox is very powerful to refill your hand. And while you are drawing a lot of cards in this deck by having access to effectively 14 1 or 2 mana spells, you can oftentimes deal with Bowmaster. My mana base is 4 Bloodstained Mires just to have higher density of lands that could enter your battle or into your graveyard to enable Delirium for both cards. It also has the ability where you can Bauble on 0, Bauble yourself, see if you want the top card of your library, and then if not, shuffle it away Bloodstained Mire. So the ability there. I didn't go crazy with utility lines, in part because we are a Blood Moon deck. So at times when Blood Moon is going to be locked, it's going to lock us these utility lines. But 2 Fiery Islets, you can use any of the kind of draw horizon lands, 2 Dens, 2 Ramanop Ruins as ways just when we aren't on the Blood Moon plan to have some utility lines. 1 Sokuzen is something we could channel from hand as well. We then go to 5 color Amamamnath, 62.7%. So this deck here, you're using like Deathrite Shaman, Delighted Halfling, just kind of cheap ways to go into turn 2 Jarsil, Oko, or Uro. You have Omnath and Minskimbu as powerful 4-drops, as well as Leyline Binding, which is just another basically 1 mana removal spell, in addition with Sword Splasher and Fragment Reality. Brainstorm kind of gets rid of the wrong half problem. Bowmaster's in here to kind of ping away. Sometimes you'll see the One Ring in here. You sometimes see Teferi 3. In Best of 3, you'll often see it. I wasn't sold on Teferi 3. Found it a little soft. This version here is on a Gengantha. You might also see this typically associated with a Yorion pile. There's a lot of enter the battlefield style effects you could blink, and oftentimes, like I built it as a Yorion deck because it also gives you access to more lands, so the Field of the Dead is more enabled in that deck. So a couple different ways you can build the deck itself. In Best of 3, these games go real long. I stopped playing the deck just because it was like 50-minute games, win or lose, and I just want to cast lightning bolts. Lastly, we have, so they're calling this Dimir Shadow, but it's Dimir Tainted Pact. And I've been trying to wait to find a Tainted Pact deck, in part because it's all a bunch of 1-ofs, and I didn't want to think of finding all the 1-ofs. But the deck itself wins through the combination of casting. So every card in the deck's a 1-of, and this version's on a Lurrus deck. So you'll either see Lurrus, or sometimes you won't see Lurrus because you can play Jace, Wielder of Mysteries instead. You might see this as an Esper deck. You might see this as Grixis. There's so few different ways, but the core deck, you're going to cast Tainted Pact, which is a 2-of, and you have Thassa's Oracle, which is a 2-of. Tainted Pact will start exiling cards until you either reveal Thassa's Oracle or your second copy of Tainted Pact that you can get into hand, and you're basically going to just keep clicking until you exile all your cards to the point, so you exile your entire library, you cast Thassa's Oracle, the trigger's on the stack, it checks your devotion, and it will then win the game because you have no more cards in library. The other way you can do this is with Jace, Wielder of Mystery, because you basically draw a card with no cards left in your library, very similar to how Kethis can win alternatively. With this version here, there's really no other permanence in the deck, so your devotion can potentially be 0. So it would require you to have exactly 0 cards in your library to win, even if they kill the Thassa's Oracle. So that's something to keep in mind there. The deck itself, we're not going to go through every card, but it's basically hand hate, removal, counters, card advantage, a bunch of 1-ofs that kind of replicate the same idea. Cut downs, fatal pushes, you have like opt, sleight of hand, consider, all kind of the same idea. You could play Brainstorm, however, you do have fewer number of fetch lands because you are playing a number of basics, or like not basics, like individual lands, so you may get Brainstorm locked more often than not. But just lots of cheap kind of spells in there to kind of help you find whatever key cards. You can also look at something like Dig Through Time potentially in here. You have Beseech the Mirror that helps you tutor with the Lurrus Companion mixed into there. So that is it for the week of what we see in terms of stats. Let me know if you have any other cool decks, stuff that's working. Drop the link with the stats if you have it. Like I said, I'm going to try to do as many of these demo videos as possible to give you a feel and kind of reference. If you want to see any of it, it's in the playlist, and you can kind of catch from there. In any case, thanks for watching. Hope you have a great one, and stay safe out there.